probably agree on.
Yeah, the playoff team for sure.
So do you.
I mean, I tell you what, I don't think there was a more accurate state. And
if they struggle again, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can keep Alex Critch, but.
What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here. It's another edition of Summer School. That's our college ball preview series on the Cover 3 podcast today. I'm talking Utah. Where do I head? I head to Ute Zone. That's utezone.com. My man, Steve Bartle. What's going on, Steve?
What's up, Bud? How are you, man?
Doing well, man. Just cranking through these. Really enjoying it. Early June and learn as much as I can about probably the most fun summer school I've ever had, right? So better than back when we were actually in school. You been all right?
Very much agree with that. As somebody that spent a few summers in summer school growing up, this was definitely more my kind of vibe. So it's good, man.
Last year, Utah, kind of a weird season with Cam Rising just never coming back. And I remember we were at the Resorts World for the Pac-12 Media Day, RIP Pac-12. And he was like, yeah, I'm good to go. And I was like, all right, cool. Like, I'm not even going to really need to run this because it was kind of the same line he would get everybody. And I guess the injury was never right, but a pretty good looking spring game. Are we they had to believe that he could get back to 100% for to stick with the guy for this long, right?
For sure. Yeah. That last season was, that was something I haven't seen at Utah or elsewhere. And so it was, it was a pretty unique situation. I think, if you know Cam, you know how competitive he is. He's been through a serious injury before. He understands what it takes. And I really think, his optimism, he is as optimistic as they come. That's where that charisma, that it factor that Kyle Whittingham often talks about, that is where that stems from, just that optimism and that competitiveness. And I think, that coupled with, a number of different factors just led to, a little bit being a little too optimistic with the injury, not being as realistic as maybe he and the program needed to be. And so it was just a weird situation, but he's back. And I think there's a ton more optimism and I think relief that he's back. When he took the field in practice for spring ball, to actually see him on the field, our first exposure to him, in spring ball was actually throwing a touchdown pass to Micah Pittman. And so, you see that's the first play you see in spring, and the optimism is instantly right back with him. And so, he's healthy. He's now 16 months removed from the injury. And so when you talk to people about that sort of thing, it's typically 18 months, 24 months to get back to what you used to be. And so, that's where Cam's at. And, he's looked great. He looked great during spring ball. Every time we saw him, he got to run a little bit as well. So he's definitely looking like the Cam of old. Whether, how much Cam of old will that be? We'll see.
How would you compare this offense to the last time we saw a Cam Rising offense?
Ooh, yeah. This is going to be, looking at this roster and seeing, the offense in spring ball. There's a lot of weapons for him that he didn't have in years past, right? So Utah brought in Dorian Singer, former USC and Arizona wide receiver. They brought Brant Keithy back. They have another emerging tight end in Landon King. They brought in another tight end from UCLA and Carson Ryan. There's just a lot of weapons. And then with the offensive line, where the group with Satawa Laumea and Keaton Bills, who have now moved on to the NFL, where that was geared more towards the run game. Utah's upgraded the athleticism in that room with some of the recruits that they brought in. Spencer Fano, obviously the freshman All-American last year, headlining that group. But Caleb Lomu and Isaiah Garcia coming in. All of these guys have upgraded the athleticism, along the offensive line, and that tends to bode well for pass protection in particular. And so, when you look at this roster, you just the weaponry that he has around him, the options that he has to throw to, is just on a completely different level than what it was, prior to his injury and prior to this past season. So it'll be interesting to see how that actually, whether that changes their philosophy and how they want to go about their offense. But just looking at it on paper, the strengths of this team all point towards a pretty promising passing attack.
Who's the guy? Let's fast forward to Big 12 media days, which does seem weird to say.
Yeah.
Who probably won't be voted first or second team all Big 12 in the preseason, but you get around with your Utah Riders after the event's over. How the heck? Like this guy's got a pretty good shot to make a team in the postseason.
That's a great question. I would say if there was one player that fits that bill, I would say Karenni Reed. The linebacker for Utah that started the last couple years. He's been super productive for Utah in each of the last 3 seasons. Former walk-on that just has a knack for making plays. Obviously at linebacker you have Lander Barton, who controls the headlines, and he's the guy that's emerged as the next star of the defense, and rightfully so. He's a tremendous playmaker. It was really unfortunate that he suffered that season-ending injury when he did, because that game against USC, Lander was really starting to come into his own, at that linebacker position. But Karenni Reed is a guy that just, when he's out there on the field, he just has a knack for making plays and being productive. So I think Karenni Reed probably fits that bill the best when we're talking about guys that are probably going to be overlooked, but just have a way of making an impact this season. I think Karenni Reed is the guy to top that list.
What are the positions where they're just loaded and they can survive the natural attrition that comes to football during the season?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the end positions on both sides of the ball. Tight end. They've got 5 that they feel really good about. They've got a promising redshirt freshman that has some good pass catching chops, and then Caleb Lohner, who is the Baylor basketball transfer, who's going to make the transition to tight end. I've actually heard really good things about the last few weeks he's been with the program and getting after it. He's brought a mentality that points to him wanting to make an impact of some sort this season. So that tight end room, it's 5 deep with Brant, Keithy, Landon King, Carson Ryan, Dallin Bentley, and Mickey Sugaturanga. And then you add in those other 2, and that's a really, really strong group that'll be able to, provide a lot of versatility for the offense first and foremost. But then also you've got the insurance policies needed to maintain a good level. And then on the other side of the ball, defensive end, they've got 8 or 9 guys, in that room. And, outside of a couple young guys, Cash Dillon coming in this summer, and maybe one other, the new Ellis coming in, Elijah Ellis, I think is what it is. There's so many Ellises. There's Luther Ellis, Jonah Ellis just moved on, and now there's another Ellis coming in. It's a good family tree to bet on with football. But that group is really, really deep. Now, obviously, they've got to find a way to replace Jonah Ellis, who was a 3rd-round draft pick. Logan Fano is coming off an injury, but he's expected to be back at some point this upcoming season. And so, you've got depth there. You've got Connor O'Toole. You've got Van Fillinger, 2 starters that have played the majority of snaps the last 2 or 3 seasons. You've got a couple guys coming up in Jonah Leia and Keo Akana that, provide depth there at that pass rushing spot. You've got some bigger bodies now with VLT is what we're dubbing him. And then John Henry Daly, the transfer from BYU, is another bigger body. So the depth there at defensive end is really, really good. But again, they need obviously somebody to step up as that playmaker.
Awesome, man. I look at this defense. It seems to me like this has a chance to be better, or like maybe clearly better than all of the other Big 12 defenses. I don't really know, like, if I can ask you about that, because it's your first year covering a team in the Big 12, but having junior back and also the other DT back, like that's pretty big in the middle to have. And then it sucks to lose Reed, but linebacker is still really strong, at least the starters. And what are your thoughts on the secondary? They did take multiple transfers there in
Right.
the secondary. Is that like a reason for concern, or what do you think there?
Yeah, it'll be. I think this defense will be one of the top units in the league, and that's I know Iowa State, Kansas State. I know those are top notch defenses. In the Big 12 as well, and that so they'll be in that mix for that. Defensive line is going to be the strength of this unit now. Linebacker with Lander Barton and Karenni Reed. They lost Lavani Demooney, who was an all-conference Pac-12 linebacker at Stanford before he transferred to Utah prior to last season. He suffered a season-ending injury in spring ball, which is unfortunate. But they've got other guys in that room still, guys that have been in that room for a couple years, and some young guys in that room as well. In the secondary is going to be really, really interesting. Obviously you replace the two safeties, Cole Bishop, who was a second-round pick to the Buffalo Bills, Sione Vaki, who was a dynamic playmaker, probably gets a little more love for what he did on the offense side of the ball than the defense, but he was such a physical presence in that secondary for Utah. So those two are going to be tough to replace. And then they also lost a couple cornerbacks, Miles Battle and Travis Broughton, who transferred to TCU. But what they've done is, they hit the portal as teams do. No Dabo's over here, right? So, it's they hit the portal. They brought in Keenan Johnson from Georgia Tech, who they absolutely loved his film from Georgia Tech. He had a great showing against Clemson last year, and I know Clemson. There's still a lot of talent in that program. But he came in early. He enrolled, mid-year last year and was able to participate in spring ball. And every time we were up there watching practice, he seemed to make a play. He had an impressive interception, one practice that it was very reminiscent of that Travis Hunter interception against TCU. Just, you see those sort of things and it's just, there's a lot of optimism around him and his ability to come in and not only contribute, but be a guy that they can count on to make plays of that manner. And then they also brought in Cameron Calhoun from Michigan, who was a pleasant surprise this spring. And I think he's earned that third spot at cornerback to go along with Johnson and Zemiah Vaughn, who I think has a chance to be, one of, if not the top cornerback, which is, I know, saying something considering who else is in this league. But I think Zemiah Vaughn has a chance to be really good, and at CB1. And then at safety, you bring in Alakai Gilman, who was, also an all-conference transfer from Stanford. If you go back over the years, they've added, I think now 3 guys from Stanford in consecutive years. Alakai Gilman, Lavani Demooney, and Gabe Reed the year before that. So, and they've all had success here. So you bring him in to a group that includes Nate Ritchie, who was with the team in 2020, the COVID season. Nate Ritchie played that year. Jonathan Hall is a promising young guy that has impressed from the moment he stepped on campus. So he's in that mix. And then Teo Johnson is a guy that I think has a chance to be one of those breakout players at free safety. Just, when you talk about a true center fielder and the raw qualities and traits that you need to be successful there, the athleticism, the sort of athleticism you need there, he has it in spades. And so I think he had a really good spring making that transition to free safety. So I think they feel really good about what they have in safety. Obviously at corner, going to need some development from some of the guys beyond those top 3, but they feel good about that room now.
Is there a position battle you have an eye on?
Man, it's going to be fascinating to see how that wide receiver room shakes out, because you've got Money Parks, who's he's been with the program since he got, since he came out of high school. He's been productive the last couple of years. You've added Dorian Singer to that mix. Micah Pittman is back. And now you've added Damian Alford from Syracuse, who's a giant body, good athlete still. But just how the hierarchy of this room shakes out is going to be really fascinating. I think it's going to be as competitive a group battle that we've seen at Utah at that wide receiver position, just considering the the depth of talent that they have in that room now with those four. And then, they still have other guys. Munir McClain, who has been with the program, he flashed, at times last season. He's been kind of stuck in between receiver and tight end. But I think with Aldis Whitted, the receiver coach here, he's been really good for Munir and his development over the last year. So I think you've got those five. And then Dadrian Zipperer is a guy that I think could be a guy that has a very specific role, but can contribute this season as well. You brought in Tayshawn Lyons as well from Washington, and you trust Washington's evaluations of receivers. And so, that wide receiver room, just how it all shakes out, that's going to be fascinating because, there's a lot of talent there, but they've got to establish who's top dog and who's, and work their way down. It's going to be really, really interesting.
I like a lot of this schedule overall, right? If you think about who the worst teams in the league are, you get BYU, Houston, Arizona State, and Baylor, which is probably four of the worst five. I mean, depending on how you feel about them, anybody is capable of breakout, I guess, in theory, the Big 12. But as we begin the season, those are probably four of the worst five in the league. And then you get Colorado, not the last game, but pretty late, which if they have depth issues again, September Colorado was much better than November Colorado. Although that game last year with Utah was like the rock fight of all rocks. Like,
yeah.
It's like, this is it's not great. But then short rest at UCF. You and half the country will be in Orlando for Thanksgiving, where I live. Yep. So it'll be fascinating. Do you think this is a team that is worthy of being the Big 12 favorite?
I absolutely think it's worthy of being considered the favorite. Obviously, that's no slight to the other contenders, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Arizona. But just considering, what Utah has on this roster, what they return, and the fact that a lot of this group has been through, championship contending seasons, I think that that's extremely valuable, for any program, right? To have that championship pedigree is really, really important. And that culture is really, really important. So I think it makes a lot of sense. And then when just looking at the roster itself and then the schedule, as you pointed out, it sets up really, really well. You've got Baylor as a non-conference game. That was a game that was previously scheduled. It was a non-con and they just couldn't replace it. So you've got Baylor, in week 2, and that'll be really interesting to see how that game plays out, in Rice-Eccles Stadium, Big 12 member, and it being a non-con game. So that'll be really, really interesting. And then going on the road to Oklahoma State, that's going to be a big test. That's to kick off Big 12 play, in Stillwater is going to be, it's going to be an electric atmosphere. So that'll be really, really, I think I don't want to say the key to the season, but I think getting a win over Oklahoma State really will kind of set the bar for the rest of the season.
And then that one, you're feeling pretty. And I mean, I know you haven't covered Big 12 before. I'm not saying that Mike Gundy doesn't give a damn about the non-conference, but the results in non-conference games to open the year in past years suggest, and Utah sometimes does this too. So you kind of know, like,
yep.
Are we playing the right guy? Is it? Yeah,
exactly.
At times.
Yep.
So they'll both probably sitting on a little something special for each other come that Big 12 opener. So I'm
very much so. I think that's spot on. It'll be Gundy and Witt. They're two guys cut from the same cloth almost, and so they'll certainly approach that game very similarly. And then the rest of the schedule sets up really nicely for them as well. The 2 byes I think are placed well for them. BYU, that game, that rivalry game now with conference implications is going to be it's going to be an electric atmosphere at Rice-Eccles Stadium. Obviously coming off the loss in the rivalry a couple years ago, Utah is certainly looking to get back in that win column there. But that UCF game that you mentioned, that's going to be super fascinating. Just considering it's Friday night, Thanksgiving, on the road, going ahead, 2 time zones to Florida. Just really, really interested in how that went. I think if you ask most Ute fans, they have that one circled as the biggest scheduling worry of the season.
No doubt about it. It's not quite as hard as, I don't know if you saw what the Big Ten did, but they took Michigan State and they gave them Ohio State and then short rest to Oregon.
Oh,
That's probably the toughest back-to-back that I've spotted so far this year.
That's brutal.
But yeah, oh man, Steve, I really enjoyed this, and we follow all your coverage on Ute Zone. You guys do such a great job over there, and look forward to watching Utah this year, man.
Appreciate you, bud. Thanks so much for doing this, man.